Alright, your boy is done with his 16-hour drive, and now we can go back to our regularly scheduled programming where we actually have the banner that some people were thinking we weren't going to get because it was a part of some, like, Tokyo exclusive exhibition, whatever have you thing, but I never doubted for a second that we would be getting this banner because, as we all know, Lysenko really loves money, and what's another really good way to get money? That's right, bringing back quite literally every single other GudaGuda servant alongside the new servants that are coming out with, Senno, Rikyu, and Keisuke over there. And so in this video, I'm going to outline just in as briefly as I possibly can whether or not this banner is worth summoning for. I will say just kind of overall, for doing broad strokes, I would say in general to hold off summoning on this banner if you are more interested in, say, like more meta powerful servant, because towards the end of the year, we are getting the return of very strong support in Oberon, Koyenskaya, and Castoria. Lost Belt 7 brings out Kukulkan, who I'm sure you have been hearing just everybody talk about over the last 2 years for how good she is. But then we also have Tetsuka Lipoka, who's very strong as well. And then a few months after that, we have the Arcade collab that's bringing Tiamat and Draco. Just a smattering of very insanely powerful top tier servants coming out within like a relative time span between each other. And so unless one of these servants is kind of one of your must-haves, you absolutely love them to bits, which I can understand. Nobu's on the banner, Okita's on the banner, I understand. The game player watching in the background is me just using Okita because she's just so much fun to use. But if you can resist it, I would recommend you go for some of those stronger servants. But let's say you can't resist. You just do not have the ability to resist the pull of Sakura Saber, and I guess we'll start with her first. Then Okita is a very interesting servant in that she functions as this kind of burst damage dealing servant, which normally isn't super great, and I will admit she probably could be a little bit better, but she's fun to use, you know what I mean? Like, obviously if she had like 3 turn buffs, she would be a lot better, blah blah blah, but it's really hard to not have fun with a servant that just stacks up a bunch of damage really quickly and then just nukes the enemy into oblivion. And she at the very least has all the basic things you would want a DPS to have in a battery: survivability, she can drain all the stars to herself and then get some decent crit damage on that. But I would be lying to you if I said that she was a top tier single target quick servant, but I'd also be lying if I said she wasn't fun to use. So again, if you want like the best single target quick servant in the game, you wait 2 years for the new Dantes to come out. But Okita over here can get the job done. But is she like the most meta pick? No. Do I still like her regardless? And if I didn't have her, would I summon for her? Probably. Ryoma, on the other hand, is one of those servants that I think I've been a little too harsh to. I still don't think they're the greatest, but I do think they have a pretty decent average sewing. They've got the good battery, their refund is okay, and they have a gimmick, I guess if you want to call it that, of becoming really bulky whenever they use their NP, getting that 50% and defensive buff, which is not bad, but it's just, they're kind of just, and I'm not saying this to be mean, but it's more like mid in the truest sense of the word. And not that they're bad, because the definition of mid and what that means, I feel like has been lost on a lot of people. You hear mid and you think bad, but it's like, no, they're like middle of the road. They do a job. They don't do it better than most servants, but they certainly do it better than some of the more stinkers in the game, and they're just kind of like middle of the road for me. Can you get away with using them? Of course, obviously. Although, would I recommend that you save for a better AoE art servant? Obviously, wait for Summer Ibuki to come back. Wait for Ruler Melusine to release next year. There are just stronger servants that are releasing, but again, it's one of those servants, and I think this banner in general is, for the most part, if you really like these servants, you can go for them. And I think Ryoma, you kind of have to be those diehard fans to go for them. But again, you'll get a pretty average performance out of them, which again means that they're not going to do anything impressive, but you'll get value out of them. Like, they'll be able to perform and, do the standard looping thing. Izumo is the first one here that I actually think is probably one that might warrant summoning for, because, and I know a lot of people aren't going to want to hear this, but I'm just going to have to tell you the truth, she is a lot better than Okita. Go figure that the more recent servant is going to be better than the year 1 servant, literally a year 1 servant. They have given her buffs, and again, I am a huge Okita enjoyer myself, so let me tell you, and unbiasedly, I can tell you that Izumo, she just kind of slaps, dude. I mean, big battery, being able to ramp up your damage and just kind of obliterate the enemy, she's just generally very, very strong. There's not a whole lot to actually go into depth with her because, like Okita, she's pretty straightforward to use, at least in my opinion. It's like, all right, pop the big battery, start smacking the enemy, and you're just ramping up more and more damage as you go along, and eventually the enemy's just pasting the ground, and good job, you've won the fight. That being said, again, if you prefer Okita, I'm not gonna like, tell you that you can't go for her, even if I don't think she's as good as a quick DPS. FGO is one of those games that you can kind of generally get by with whoever you like. They've been trying to buff other servants up, from like year 1 and like year 2 that maybe didn't have the most complete kits up to like more modern standards, and they're trying to like bring other people up. I mean, Salta's an excellent example that you'll see this philosophy during the next anniversary, where Salta right now is not in a good position, but when she gets her buff, she's exceptional, right? Like, she's definitely brought into the meta, so people that like her, as popular as she is, can get away with using her. Now, someone that's not very popular and that no one's really trying to use is Hijikata. Even though I know he's not super popular, if you did decide to summon for him, he's better than you probably think he is. And now I know people are going to be like, okay, bro, you can't be out here saying that, like, Izumo's a lot better than Okita and then run defense for Hijikata, but you kind of have to run defense for Hijikata because everybody thinks he's like the worst servant in the game, and he's certainly not the greatest, but you could put in work with this guy. They fixed one of his issues by giving him a gut, so it's easier to trick his like lower HP conditions that he wants, because Hijikata is one of those servants that the lower his HP gets, the more damage he does. So they kind of fixed that in a way, by giving him that guts and being able to give some pretty decent party-wide buffs with like the buster damage and then like the crit. I mean, that's not nothing. It's not crazy by any stretch of the imagination, but hey, you could do some kind of funny stuff with that, right? Again, if you just need a DPS in general, I would probably say that if you want specifically a single target, it's probably Izumo, then Okita, but if you wanted to be funny, you could go for Hijikata. I wouldn't recommend it. Himiko might be one of like the more better servants on this. In fact, looking at them, I would say like on average, if you can get good at using these servants, Himiko might get you the most value, but it's not going to be in the most traditional sense because you're not going to use her for farming. You're going to pretty much strictly use her for boss fights, advanced quests, the Bleached Earth high difficulty missions whenever we get those. She's essentially like the more offensive version of Morgan if you're using her in those immortal team comps, whereas Morgan is more like glue for the entire team comp. Himiko is like, well, instead of making us a little bit more stable, what if I just palmed the enemy into the ground with like a 100k buster crit and just absolutely eviscerated them? And then what if I just followed that up with like a 500k buster crit? What if I just turned them into paste? Whereas if you use Morgan, she can sometimes do that depending on power mods, but Himiko, because it's always crits and she doesn't really care who she's critting against, you're gonna get that very consistently. So I would maybe go for her if you have a more established bot, right? If you're considering summoning on this banner, of course. If you already have like, your loopers established, you've got some good DPSs, and you want to venture into using different team comps, Himiko is quite fun to use in those. But I would say, because, you're not going to be using her in like 90% of the content, which is locking down your ability to get through free quests as efficiently as possible, I would maybe strave off from going for her until you have those established looper guys. And to be fair, there's not like crazy looper people on this banner, with maybe the exception of the original Okita altar, who's pretty good now as a buster AoE servant, and then the assassin Okita, the 4-star, gets really good during the next anniversary and becomes a very good, like, I would say maybe not tippy top tier, but pretty high-end quick AoE servant that you can get away with using. But then I guess to round out our 5 stars, we have Maou Nobu, who, look, I'm a little bit biased for this servant, let me just tell you that at the beginning, because even when she first dropped over here without all of her buffs, I still thought she was okay. I know a lot of people were just really butt mad that it's like, oh man, I can't believe she doesn't get the 90% attack buff immediately. You're telling me I gotta wait 2 turns? I'm like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with ramping damage, of doing good damage on like, or maybe like okay damage, let's call a spade, okay damage turn 1, and then decent, and then getting the good damage on that 3rd turn, right? But then, they've started to improve her by like giving her batteries. She can like now trigger the burning battlefield on herself. The Sky attribute power mod is obviously going to be very, very strong. It's not the most prevalent power mod, but when you need it, you're really glad that you have Maou Nobu over here. It'll be really weird to kind of describe it this way, but again, I'm trying to keep this concise and in a way that I think the average player can kind of visualize what I'm getting at. Just kind of view her as maybe like AoE Jolter, even though she doesn't nearly do as much damage as Jolter does with her like highest attack stat in the game. She kind of functions the same way in that you're just trying to dome people for some really big damage, with the added benefit that at least now she has a power mod. Who knows if Jolter will get one in the future. I don't know if you're going to watch this in like 2 months where they go ahead and decide to give Jolter, you know, anti-man power mod, which would be nutty. But she's also, you know, got all the makings that you would want, you know, a DPS to have. I mean, that's also just not including like the invincibility she has. That's just fairly decent. Now, the other thing that might influence what banner you decide to go summon on are the 4 stars. As again, I do know that, say, like someone like Saito is really popular. That's kind of why I ran a little bit of defense for Hijikata, because if you want Saito because you want to do the Virgil memes, you are summoning for Hijikata at the same time, so that might affect whether or not you want to go summon for Virgil over there. Whereas I think if we're talking about like decent value, the Okita banner is not bad, because you either walk away with, again, I think Izumo's better as a single target DPS, but it's hard to beat the value of getting a good DPS or a really good quick looper when she gets her buff in a couple of months. Well, not a couple of months, you know, it's next anniversary, but you get what I'm saying. It's a pretty decent value banner, especially because some of the other banners just don't have a rate up 4-star for whatever reason, like Himiko and Okita Alter, who's pretty good now after her buffs, and Izumo, who's really strong. I guess they just deemed that, well, these 5 stars are a bit stronger than some of the other ones, so we're just not going to throw up a rate up 4-star, which, who knows, maybe that does affect which banner you decide to summon on. Again, tried to keep this one as concise as possible and tried to keep it rather simple, so that way, you know, we're not getting into like the nitty gritty of like the calcs and how much damage these guys are exactly doing, because it's simple. But I hope you were able to come to an informed decision because of this video, and if you did, then I would appreciate a like in the video and maybe even a subscription to the channel. And if you do decide to summon on any of these banners, go ahead and tell me what you're going to be summoning on in the comments down below. Again, I will say overall I would advise not summoning on any of these banners. I don't think they're beating out the banners that we're going to be getting even at the end of this year, plus a lot of the new servants that are coming out next year. You know, not just Lost Belt 7 and Lilim Harlot, but you know, next summer Go Figure is ridiculously broken. So if you are more free to play, it's probably smarter to just start saving for some of those servants. But again, I've been there, you know, you would just want to summon for a servant that even though you just probably won't break them out all that often, you just want to have them in your Chaldea. I've been there. I mean, when I first started playing the game, I summoned for Skahawk. I didn't really use her all that often, but I just liked having Skahawk in my Chaldea. So at the same time, I can also just understand wanting to collect servants that you really like. So let me know who you're going to be summoning for in the comments down below. Me, personally, I'm still saving for Huyan, so you can expect a big ol' summon for that when October rolls around. But that is going to be then, and now is now. And now I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here, so you guys have yourselves a nice rest of your day, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace.